Okay, welcome to Mini Lecture 2. This is going to be a fairly brief lecture, and what I want to simply introduce in this is a couple of the aspects of the physical geography of Russia and Europe. And what I want to emphasize is this issue of climate. How does the physical geography of Europe and of Russia influence their climates? Now, the first thing I want to point out is that, by and large, all of Europe is farther north than pretty much all of the United States. And so you should kind of put that in your head. And yet, Europe especially has a very moderate climate. In other words, not too long ago I was in Italy, which is significantly farther north than Florida, and yet at the same time of the year they were having virtually identical temperatures. Now, why does that occur? Well, what you want to remember are these factors. We have something called the marine effect, continentality, and then I want to talk a little bit about the result in terms of Russia, which is in terms of their tundra and their permafrost. So let's get to these. First of all, climate is influenced by where places are. Okay, so, and I want to get to this two concepts, the marine effect and continentality. Quite simply, the marine effect means the closer you are to very large bodies of water, the less variable your climate is going to be. So water acts to moderate temperatures. When you're near the coastline, it's never going to be as cold as if you're far from the coastline. Okay? Also works with heat. Closer out of the coastline, it's never going to be quite as hot as it is far from the coastline. So the middle of the Sahara Desert is much, much hotter than the coastal areas of northern Africa. Now in Europe, what that means, because we have all of these coastlines, is that you're never very far from water. That helps keep the climate of much of Western Europe much more moderate than anywhere else at the same latitude. The other thing that we can say is that in terms of Europe particularly, that marine effect is also influenced by what the temperature of that water is. And in the case of Europe, what we have is what's called the Gulf Stream. Now this is a very warm body of, or stream of water, current of water, that comes from the equatorial regions up along the north coast, up along the coast of eastern North America, and then skirts across the Atlantic and this direction. Now what that does is that means that all of this surface water that the air is interacting with is relatively warm, moderately warm. Certainly not as warm as it is here, but it stays relatively warm. And that helps keep much of Europe relatively warm even in the winter months. Now let's flip this around to continentality. Continentality means how far are you from water? It's the inverse of the marine effect. And unfortunately, the downside for Russia, and in fact for much of Canada, is that it is a long way from any water body. So much of the interior of Russia is literally thousands of kilometers from an open water source. Remember that much of this area of the world is frozen during half the year. The Arctic Ocean is covered with ice, and so it doesn't really work as water when it is frozen. All right, so let's take a look at this in a little more detail. This is a map that was done that is an index of this idea of continentality. How far are you from water that will moderate your climate? And what you'll notice is that a significant portion of Russia is in the farthest aspect from open water. You'll notice right here, by the way, that's the Gobi Desert. That's about as far as anything gets from water. But you'll notice that some of northern Canada is the same way. It's fairly far from water, and so it has an extreme continental effect. Now, what does continental or continentality do? Well, it produces extreme ranges in temperature. And so when we look at much of Russia, this is the seasonal temperature range. And what you'll notice is that the equatorial regions, all this area here, really doesn't change temperature season to season to season. As we move poleward, that variability increases, and as we move continentally, it gets even more extreme. And what that means is that across this broad swath of Russia, we end up with extremely cold winter temperatures. So cold, in fact, that the ground freezes. And that's what we mean by permafrost. Areas of permafrost then really don't have any tree growth. That's what we mean by tundra. Tundra are areas absent trees at high northern latitudes with frozen ground or permafrost. Okay, that's it for our lecture on the physical, especially the continentality, marine effects, and the climate of Europe and Russia. And we'll see you next time.